Okay, so hello, future educators. So today I will be talking about a reading comprehension strategy that you can use in your future classroom. And this strategy is called the Thinking, Reading Aloud strategy that I think is very effective because it is to be delivered by using explicit instruction through modeling, coaching practice, as well as reflecting. Um, And I really like this strategy because it really helps readers clarify their understanding of reading and their understanding of how to use these strategies. So, for example, when your student, goes off to the library and, brings a book home and they come across this passage that they have no clue whatsoever how to understand it. They don't know what it's talking about at all. They can go and refer back to the thinking aloud strategy and use that to help him or her understand a text, whether that passage is difficult because it has unknown really big fancy words, or maybe the passage is just ambiguous, has a lot of clarity. We can definitely refer to the thinking aloud strategy and basically implement that and make sure that students are following along, and that's just a great way for students to develop really strong comprehension skills. All right, so there are 5 steps to the thinking aloud strategy, and today we're going to be using a book called Peter the Rabbit. It's one of my favorite books. There's a huge series of this out there. I definitely, though, recommend if you're going to use the thinking aloud strategy is to maybe find a book that's a little bit more challenging and has more, greater unknown words. So maybe, have like a chapter book. Those are a little bit more challenging, depending on the grade level that, of course, that you're teaching. Um, so the first step really is to find a passage to read aloud that contain points of difficulty, unknown words, or contradictions. So have your students find a passage, and for example, we're all going to be reading Peter the Rabbit as a classroom. And so I read, if this were a real, classroom, I'd already have the book printed out, and so that you all can follow along as we read. But first, as we read, I want you guys, I'll tell you, my students, to find a passage that they think is unclear, a word that they're not sure of in a passage, and I'll tell them to take a pencil or a highlighter and go underline that so that we can discuss it as a classroom. And so I'll give them a few minutes, 1 to 2 minutes, to find a passage that's difficult to read. And then second step, continue. So as I read through the book, as I begin reading this book, I'll have students follow along silently. So I want to make sure, model clearly that I just want students to be following, using their index finger to follow along as I read. So I would just, just encourage them to be, active listeners and paying close attention to points of difficulty, or, looking for those challenging words. And then after I'm done reading the book, on my whiteboard, we can come together as a class and have students raise their hands if they came across a word or a challenging phrase or passage that they think is unclear, or something that they just find challenging to understand. So we can have students volunteer, and then we can write those common errors or those common misunderstandings on the whiteboard. For example, when I was reading, I'm a student now, and I found a really big word that I just had no idea what it was. So I found this word shimmery, right? there's this word shimmery that I just couldn't understand. And so now on my whiteboard, I'm going to take my marker and write it on my whiteboard. Shimmery. And in the middle of my whiteboard, I'm going to write a big fat question mark, because I don't know what these words mean. And then maybe I came across a text that I don't even understand. Like it's not the word, it's the entire passage is just unclear to me. What do I do? So I can have students read, and maybe it says, Mrs. Tickly Winkly is ever so busy hanging washing, but the robin's song keeps her going all day. What funny stockings hanging over the bristly grass? So there you go. I don't know what bristly means. So I can, students can say bristly, and I can write it down. And also maybe they don't understand this entire passage. So maybe we can write the page number. So for example, maybe this is let's say page 9. I write page 9. And then I'll keep asking for students to volunteer to, if they want to share those words or phrases or pages that they found difficult to understand. And then we can all go back and say, okay, what is shimmery? What does bristly? Let's go back to page 9 and let's see if we can understand that passage together as a class by reading it aloud. And so I think that's a great way to get students engaged, because not only are we allowing students to, volunteer, their answers, which is great, because that's a great way to, let students be in control, because we're still in that little we do it as together, and that's important, that students have that control over the lesson. And so that's a really great way. That's a great way to model this thinking aloud strategy. We can ask ourselves, okay, so what is it about this passage that makes it difficult? Are there any unknown words? What is it that tells me that it's being contradictory? Why do I find it unclear? Asking your students these questions, to help them. And then we can go back and say, okay, well, we can ask, well, before I find it to be difficult, or before I give up and say that I can't understand this passage, did I ever make predictions? Did I ever maybe look at the visual pictures to help me form these understandings? Maybe I can just look at the pictures, maybe I can just, make text-to-self connections, right? And so when you use these strategies, we are helping us. And we're basically, everything is, out loud. So that's very important that we're, able to model that out loud, especially as speech educators. Now, so we actually covered the first, the second step. The third step is to have students work with partners to practice the strategy. And so during that step, definitely encouraging students to work with groups or pairs. Maybe we can form like a buddy system. So one person can be the reader and the other person can maybe quiz the reader when he or she is done, and then have them take turns. And this also transitions really well into the step 4, which is independent practice. And, with the independent practice, we can definitely encourage students to, use digital media. So I'm a huge fan for digital media. I love the computer. I love the internet. There are a wide variety of online resources that we can implement for extra practice. And so there's a really cool website that I found called Into the Book, and it really helps students make connections, make predictions, inferences, and it's just a very engaging way. It's just a very engaging structure that helps students boost up their comprehension skills, which I think is absolutely great. Now, finally, the last step is to basically encourage that extra practice. It never hurts to encourage that extra practice, and definitely tell them to practice at home. Make it as a reward. I always thought that computer time was always a reward. I always loved it, and I always find it super interactive and engaging. Whenever I tried to understand something that I found difficult. So, also, basically using the strategy that is, learned, and integrating that with other lessons that contribute to how and why, it's important. And most of the time, we'll have students that, where, comprehension might come automatically to them, and those are probably going to be our good readers. And sometimes they'll be, I guess, less motivated to do it because they're too advanced. But we still need to continue to encourage using the strategy, and also, of course, later down the road, be able to implement other reading comprehension strategies, because they may come across a really difficult passage, along the way as they move grade level up, and they're not going to be able to understand that passage. And so if they're stuck, we can't just have them give up, or remain stuck. We need to obviously think about ways that they can go about to help them get back on the right track to comprehending that text. So of course, if you're using that thinking aloud strategy, if you're going back and referring to, am I making predictions, am I making inferences, am I able to make text to self, text to word connections. Those are really helpful, and we just, as future educators, we need to, offer that differentiated strategies and instruction to the classroom so that students are able to get a little bit of everything. So I think that's really important. And then towards the end of the lesson, I can ask them, hey, all you guys, did you guys get a better understanding of today's lesson? Have students offer their feedback. Give the teacher a thumbs up or thumbs down if they understood it or not. Also, basically just allowing them to, offer or ask questions if they're, still stuck. And if they need extra help, make sure you have some time available to them after class or after school. And also, of course, it's a ticket way out to making sure that they've understood the material. You might want to have like a formative assessment, which is definitely recommended. And it's a great preference when you want to try to implement the UDL principles, which stands for the Universal Design Learning Principles, which I think is great. Using a formative assessment is a great way to actually quickly assess if students are on the right track or not. So maybe you can ask them one thing they learned about Peter the Rabbit. That's a great way. I would definitely use that assessment. Maybe I can ask them specific questions, maybe like, what did Peter the Rabbit have for lunch? Or maybe ask him about the environment, the setting, ask them about different animals that he met along the way. That's a great way to really encourage or help comprehension, So that could be their ticket out. And also, of course, ask them if they were able to share some of their results when they were taking part in the guided practice or the independent practice, when they were working with their partners or groups, or also, this is a great time during the debriefing. You can talk about any errors that students are making with the procedures. So, talk about address those errors, and, just basically have students to, work on those strategies, because, it's definitely going to take some time. So if you just allow students to go back and you know, refer back to the worksheets, refer back to the lesson for today, and see what they need help on, so you can, be there as a reference if they ever get stuck. So that's a great way. So that's definitely the thinking aloud strategy that I wanted